Now let's look at the secondary indexes in DynamoDB. We have two types, local secondary index and global secondary index. So let's first look at the local secondary indexes, that's LSIs. You can define up to 5 local secondary indexes, and local secondary indexes are the indexes where the partition key attribute is same as the primary index of the table. So for example, in our game table, we had user ID as the primary partition key. So if you create a local secondary index, then that index will also have its partition key as user ID. Okay. So the local secondary index always has the same partition key as that of the table. Then the range key. The range key, of course, is going to be different from the primary sort key. So here we have our gameplay table and we have partition key on user ID attribute. So if we create LSI, the LSI will also have the same partition key. And you cannot have a simple key on any local secondary index. You must use a range key. So you have to use a combination of partition key and a sort key. So for example, in this gameplay table, user ID and game ID is the primary key, user ID being the partition key and game ID being the sort key. So examples of LSIs could be user ID and game timestamp. So if you create an index with user ID as partition key and game timestamp as the sort key, or user ID as partition key and result as a sort key, then these will be local secondary indexes. Now, there are some limits on local secondary indexes. We already know that we can create up to 5 LSIs, and indexed items must be under 10 gigs, okay? The reason for this is the local secondary index sits on the same partition, same physical partition as the original table. And we have seen that a partition is maximum up to 10 gigs. So you have to have your local secondary index data within the size of the partition. Cannot go beyond that. And local secondary indexes can only be created at the time of creating the table, and you cannot delete them later on. So this is important thing to remember. With local secondary indexes, you can only query a single partition. You cannot query across the partitions, and LSI support all different consistency models, that is eventual, strong, or transactional consistency. And another good thing is the LSIs consume the provisioned capacity that's allocated to the underlying table. So you don't have to pay for additional capacity consumption. It uses the same capacity that's allocated to the table. You can query any table attributes even if these attributes are not projected onto the index. What I mean by this is when you create an index, you have an option of projecting non-key attributes on the index. So apart from the partition key and sort key, you can ask DynamoDB to add additional attributes. For example, if I create an LSI on user ID and game timestamp, I can ask DynamoDB to also store the result and duration attributes along with the index. Now, this is going to increase the size of the index, but that's going to speed up your queries. So if your queries require additional attributes, you can project them onto the index, and you can project up to 20 such attributes. And if your table has more than 20 attributes and your application requires more than 20, then you can project all attributes onto the index. If you want to project fewer than 20, then you can name the attributes that you want to project. So that's about the local secondary indexes. Now let's look at the global secondary indexes.